The Lost Generation, a Tonya Oriel Tale, by Dave Haddock. Chapter 1. Thunder crashed over the roar of heavy engines. The stench of diesel and scorched earth saturated the atmosphere. The driller's break was just about over. He savoured a last drag on his stim. He could have sworn he just lit the damn thing. As he ground it out on the loose black scree, his body had already started fiending for another one. He ignored it and joined the rest of his shift on the long descent into the site. He passed a fleet of hauler-vats. The massive spherical vehicles floated on a bed of anti-gravity as their vacuum tubes collected the shattered lava for processing. Further ahead, there were the scrapers. Their blades whined like banshees as they soared into the rock. Reaching his own scraper, he banged on the window. Eventually, the driver powered down and climbed out. The driller didn't know this new guy. He wasn't going to bother trying, not at the rate the corp burnt through employees. The driller climbed in and got to work. Over the next hour, the driller carved another 30 feet of lava. He could barely hear his music over the screaming blades and chugging engine. There was definitely going to be another trip to the ear doctor in his future. He needed to finish his certification and get out of the pits before his ears went for good. Suddenly, the wall ahead collapsed. The computer flashed a warning and the driller quickly cut the blades. He must have hit a pocket of what passed for air on this planet, or some other gas. He waited and hoped the tunnel ceiling would hold. The drizzle of pebbles eventually stopped. He grabbed his air sensor and climbed out. Company protocol strictly stipulated that pockets had to be tested for flammable gases before the machine could resume work. The driller moved past the scraper's blades, still steaming in the cold air, and started scanning in front of the machine. Seemed all clear. Not hazardous, at least. He moved forward, trying to see what could have caused the collapse. That's when he saw it. The sensor clattered to the ground. The junk world of Spider and Cathcart system was allegedly a neutral zone for pirates, fugitives, and others of ill repute. It was anything but safe at the moment, as Tonya Oriel, rogue scientist and explorer, sprinted through the narrow warped halls. This was getting to become a habit. The payoff from the Curium score on Hades was even bigger than she'd hoped. Most of it immediately disappeared in the maw of creditors and loan sharks that were banging on her proverbial door. Another chunk enabled her to trade up to a sweeter ship, but the remainder was going towards a treat, a Tavaran Codex, the original text for their warrior religion. Only a couple dozen still existed after the purge of the Second Tavaran War. Various museums and collectors had snatched all of the known volumes up, but somehow this fixer got one. Only after Tonya showed up and paid did he suddenly realise its value and tripled his price. So Tonya grabbed it and ran. A laser blast zipped past her and seared the wall. Tonya glanced back. It was Nagia, the plunderer, loping after her with his bad leg, a gun, and a foul expression. "You got nowhere to run, girl," he screamed and snapped off another shot. "We had a deal, Nagia," she yelled back without slowing down. "Deals change," Nagia fired again as punctuation. "That doesn't make any sense." Tonya burst past an arriving crew and cut down towards the hangars. They quickly obliged the lunatic with a gun. Nagia feverishly yelled for his crew over his comm. Fortunately, they were far too intoxicated to notice. Nagia puffed away as his feet thundered on the metal floors. His head started to feel light. He hadn't run like this for some time. He wheeled around the corner to the hangar as engines flared to life, blasting him back through the door. Tonya powered up the Beacon 2 remotely, one of her ship's new fancy tricks. She raced up the boarding ramp. As she slid into the pilot's seat, Nagia swung back inside the hangar and fired at the cockpit. The shields barely flashed as they absorbed his shots. It was like throwing pebbles at a dreadnought. Nagia ran over to flag down the deck guards, the ones manning the turrets. Tonya didn't wait around to see if he got their attention. Nagia watched the flare of her engines disappear into the distance. He was going to get her, he just had to figure out how. After a few moments, he gave up and returned to the bar. With Spider firmly in the distance, Tonya set her course. She knew a meal of real food, a glass of wine, and her new codex were all she needed to forget the unpleasantness of her business with Nagia. A message popped on her screen. She assumed it was a job, The details were written in evasive legalese, but there was a payout just to hear the offer. 3 days away if she left now. It looked like real food was going to have to wait. The Beacon 2 dropped through the atmosphere into a massive electrical storm. Tonya passed over vast trenches of land excised and chopped up before landing at Shubin Interstellar's on-site corporate headquarters. A pair of security escorted her to a small white room. A tall, gaunt lawyer smiled pleasantly before going over dozens of confidentiality agreements and other legal fine print. She scanned text until her eyes ached. After an hour, she interrupted him. "Could you at least tell me what the job is?" "I'm sorry, miss," the lawyer said with a yellowed grin. "I'm not bound to disclose any pertinent details until you have properly filled out the—" Fine, I get it." She slumped against the table. The lawyer continued. She gave verbal consents, a handful of fingerprints, even signed. Finally, the lawyer seemed satisfied. She peered up at him expectantly. "No blood? Urine?" The lawyer looked at her, puzzled. "No, miss, I don't believe that will be necessary. So what now?" "The introductory fee is currently being transferred to your account." The lawyer stood and led her out. They walked through pristine white halls. He stopped outside another door and placed his thumb against the lock. It slid open, revealing a large conference room. A thick rectangular window looked out over the dig site. Tonya stepped inside and looked at the people inside. She recognised most of them. Deke Johnson, Squig Bentley, Arthur Morrow. These were other explorers in the loosest sense of the word. They were grave robbers, plunderers, drunks and junkies who dabbled in history. If these were Tonya's competition, she was mildly offended to be on a list with these degenerates. Well, a voice said behind her. Tonya froze, recognising it instantly. "Fancy seeing you here." Tonya turned around. Senzin Turov flashed that megawatt smile of his. "Good to see you, Tonya." He stepped in for a hug. Tonya stopped him with a hand to his chest and pushed him back. He feigned offence. "What gives?" "I just showered." "Come on, Tonya. You aren't still sore about you robbing me blind?" Tonya looked out the window. "I think I'm over it." "I hope so. You stole my ship and sold it to pirates. With those Xian relics, you could buy 2 more. 3, actually." Senzin stretched and leaned against the wall beside her. He scanned the room, visibly bored. "Any idea what this is all about?" "Nope." "Maybe we should team up, like the old days." "I'd rather run with Squig," Tonya said. At that perfect moment, Squig belched and farted at the same time. He seemed quite pleased with himself. "Yeah, well, the Tonya I knew needed a man who was her equal, someone to challenge her." Senzin leaned a little closer. Tonya looked at him. Their eyes locked. "Is that what you think you are?" "A man?" "My equal." The door slid open. Gavin Arlington, CEO of Shubin, strode into the room. He almost didn't look real. Every hair, wrinkle and crease in his suit seemed as if it had a purpose, as if he demanded the same efficiency from his body that he did from his workers. An army of stoic assistants and the site foreman flanked him. His emerald eyes quickly assessed the riffraff in the room. "Come with me." Arlington led them outside. All of the mining operations within earshot had been shut down. There was only the howling wind, the now distant thunder, and the crunch of gravel under their feet as they moved towards the pits. 45 minutes of silent march passed. Senzin glanced at Tonya, genuinely baffled. She shrugged and shook her head. This was really bizarre. They were approaching a new cutting, shrouded in darkness as the sun set ahead of them. Arlington stopped at the edge of the shadow, beside one of the scrapers. Deke Johnson stumbled and nearly fell. Arlington turned back to the group. "No doubt you're wondering why I called you here," Arlington said with a dismissive glance towards Deke. He then nodded to the foreman. The newly cut gash flared up with light. It took everyone a second to adjust. Tonya squinted and focused on a bright irregularity in the middle of the black mass ahead. Embedded in the wall of lava, there was a smooth metallic facing, but this wasn't ore or a mineral vein. It was moulded, constructed plate. Tonya's first instinct was that it was wreckage of some kind. That wasn't the startling thing. There was one faded word stenciled across its surface. Artemis. Chapter 2. The Artemis. Launched in 2232, it was a generational ship of 5,000 souls in cryostasis pushing towards GJ667cc, with Janus, an AI core, at the helm. It was humanity's first expedition to the stars. Shortly after passing from our solar system into unknown space, we lost contact. So much had changed since that day. Jump points, first contacts, towering achievements and tragedy in almost equal measure. Despite the hundreds of expeditions, studies and simulations conducted over the centuries, no one ever found anything. Many came to assume that it crashed, flew into a star or dropped into a jump point. The Artemis slipped into legend. Until now. Tonya stared at a piece of history. Here, surrounded by lava, was the holy grail of explorers across the galaxy. A piece of it, anyway. Her mind was barely able to keep up with the torrent of thoughts, hopes, and ideas that assaulted her at the second she saw it. She glanced around. Everyone else was just as stunned as she was. Senzin's face twitched like he was resetting himself to comprehend what he was looking at. The sight of the Artemis even seeped through Squig's alcohol-soaked brain. No way, was all he could muster. Gavin Arlington gave everyone a few moments to let it sink in. Finally, he cleared his throat. The CEO obviously had places to be. Now you know why I called you all here. An assistant handed him a mini-glass which he read while he spoke. What we have here is a delicate situation. What's delicate? You have to tell people, Deke Johnson interrupted. All of Arlington's assistants' eyes widened, incensed at the notion that this dreg would dare interrupt their boss. No, Mr. Johnson, that is precisely what I'm not going to do, Arlington replied, hardly missing a step. Should any of you disagree with that sentiment, allow me to remind you that based on the agreements you all signed, if you breathe a word of this to anyone without my express authorization, you, your family, and your friends will be eviscerated legally, professionally, financially, socially. He glanced to his lawyer. Physically? The lawyer nodded. Physically, Arlington continued. Telling the UEE would shut this world down and eviscerate your mining operation, Tonya chimed in. Arlington glanced over and smiled. The utter lack of emotion behind the simple human gesture chilled her. There's no sense in notifying the authorities or the scientific community until we know what we have found. That's why you're here. I want the crash site of the Artemis found. My facilities, mining scanners and personnel will be at your disposal. Whoever finds the rest will share in the credit for the discovery, as well as a handsome compensation package. Everyone looked at each other, sizing up their competition. Arlington waited expectantly. You can start now, he finally said. Tonya scrambled onto the beacon too. She raced around the hold of the Freelancer, grabbing excavation tools, scanners, vid captures, her mini-glass of books. She stopped for a second to catch her breath. Every fibre of her being was on fire, charged with the possibility of being the one to unlock the fate of the Artemis. It was all so unbelievable. She gave herself a moment to bask in the thrill of it. She ran back to the dig site. When she got there, Tonya realised that she was not the only one energised by the prospective discovery. Senzin had already deputised the mining crews into excavating the Artemis fragment. They gently chipped away the black lava rock, trying to see how much more of the ancient metal lay buried. Deke Johnson's cutlass swooped overhead, kicking up a storm of loose rock. The bottom was lit up from its scanners surveying the surrounding landscape. On a nearby hillside, Squig drank from his flask while swinging a homemade scanner. Arthur Morrow walked past carrying surveying gear and deep rock scanners. He barely acknowledged them or the artefact. Not interested in analysing this art, Tonya unpacked her camera and tools. Arthur looked at her and snorted. The money ain't that. The money's out there somewhere. He motioned to the sea of solidified lava that surrounded them and moved on. Some people lack vision, Senzin said to her with a smirk. Tonya snapped a series of pictures of the Artemis fragment and stitched them together into a composite. Once the image was reconciled, she applied it to a database of Artemis imagery, trying to isolate which part of the ship it could have come from. Tonya realised Senzin was standing behind her. That's a good idea. He grinned mischievously and went back to directing workers. Someone needs to tell Deke to stop scanning so close. The gravel could damage the metal. Her mini-glass hummed. Based on the stenciling and faded markings, there was a good chance that what they were looking at was part of the starboard thruster panelling. It was helpful, but not conclusive. The panel could have come off during a crash or in space. Over the course of the next few hours, Tonya, Senzin, and the workers successfully extracted the piece and placed it carefully on the ground. Tonya slowly circled the metal and captured it from every angle. In its entirety, the piece was roughly 2 meters by 4. The edges had been melted away by the lava bath. Fortunately, its thermal shielding managed to protect this part of it long enough for the lava to cool. When she was done, she sat down and looked at it. Pretty unbelievable, right? Senzin slumped down in the gravel beside her. He sipped from some water. I can't stop looking at it, she replied. After all this time, we might actually know. Yeah, he nodded and held the water out to her. Tonya eyed the bottle hesitantly. Calm down, Tonya. We're competing, but that doesn't mean we can't be civil. Tonya took the water and drank. She hadn't realised how thirsty she'd been and ended up finishing the bottle. You're welcome, Senzin said with a chuckle. Sorry. Don't worry, I got some more coming through. Senzin glanced around. One of Arlington's assistants hurried out of the corporate headquarters with more bottles. You already have his assistants fetching you stuff. I work fast, Senzin replied with a shrug. He took the bottles. Cheers, thanks. The assistant hustled off. Senzin turned to Tonya. Shall we? They poured over every inch of the Artemis metal, front and back. Tonya cleaned it the best she could, then searched for any kind of clue to indicate what happened. There was nothing. The edges were melted to the point where it was impossible to determine whether the panel was ripped off or not. She ran tests on microsamples of the metal. Another dead end. She sat back and tried to disconnect from the puzzle. Hoping a few moments away would give her some perspective, she looked at Deke still scanning the landscape from his ship. Squig was slumped on the hillside trying to fix his scanner. He pulled an entire scanning module off and tossed it down the slope. Then, inspiration hit her. Quelling her impulse to run, she attempted a casual stroll back to the artifact. She rescanned the edges of the panel. Senzin approached. Got something? I don't know. Maybe. Tonya ran her fingers along the edge of the metal. But it's not like I'll tell you if I do. Fair enough. He stood over her and watched. Tonya grabbed the metal and tested the weight. She could flip it on her own, but not with control or without damaging it. Give me a hand, she said to the workers. They didn't move, only looked at each other, then Senzin. Yeah, I've already made arrangements with them, so they're only really helping me out. Senzin shrugged innocently. Tonya glared at him, then flipped it herself. The metal face slammed down on its other side. It hurt her spiritually to do it, but she wasn't going to give Senzin an inch. The interior side of the plate was much like the exterior. Metal. Melted. There was a patch less warped than the rest. Tonya examined every millimetre with her zoom optics. Finally, she found an edge. A clean edge. That was it. She had to suppress the swell of elation inside her to not tip her hand. She looked around, but Senzin had disappeared. 5 minutes later, Tonya was outside Arlington's temporary office. The assistant ushered her inside. Tonya again resisted the urge to sprint those final steps. Arlington was at his desk, sifting through data feeds of company assets. You found something? He asked, without looking up. I don't think this is a crash site, Mr. Arlington. Arlington finally gave her his attention. Tonya brought up photos and zoomed in on the patch until she focused on the clean edge. See that? That edge wasn't ripped or bent. It was cut. Tonya brought up additional data screens of her findings. My analysis says it was made with a precision laser that, while clumsy compared to today's standards, is period accurate to the type of tech included on the Artemis. Go on. I think it's set down here to make repairs, Tonya said, that thrill bubbling up again. It's still out there. Quite a discovery indeed, Mr. Turov, Arlington said to a side door. Tonya looked around, confused. Senzin stepped out. I told you we found something big. Senzin stepped up beside Tonya. We, she stammered. Her confusion quickly turned to fiery indignation. Mr. Arlington, I don't know what he told. Miss Oriel, please. Arlington waved his hand. You've sold me. Tonya glared at Senzin, suddenly wishing for pyrokinetic powers. The offer still stands, Arlington said as he turned his back to his feeds. Now, you two go find it. Chapter 3. Tonya stormed down the hall with Senzin strolling along after her. The Shubin employees got out of her way. Minutes earlier, Arlington had passed off the two of them to one of his assistants, who explained expense accounts and contact protocol. She barely paid attention. She was still fuming from the stunt Senzin had pulled. "So where do you want to start looking?" Senzin grinned as he kicked the hornet's nest. It worked. Tonya whirled back. "How the hell did you sell him on that line of crap?" She shoved him. "You couldn't have known what I found." Shove number 2. "For someone so fascinated with civilizations, you really should try to learn more about people." "Tell me," she said, and shoved him another time. Senzin sighed. Arlington's probably the only person in the universe who couldn't care less about the Artemis. An assistant ran up to Senzin and delivered a cup of coffee. "Ah, wonderful, thanks." He smiled at the assistant, then turned back to Tonya. "I just told him that we'd been working on analysing the fragment and found something that could be huge. I didn't want to speak out of turn before your analysis was done, so I rushed here to secure a quick meeting. His imagination, or whatever program in his head handles that function, did the rest." Tonya glared at him. Senzin sipped from his coffee and waited. "You stay out of my way." "That's it." Senzin shook his head, disappointed. "Come on, Tonya. You used to be wittier than that." "How about, you don't stand a chance against me, and you know it." She turned and walked away. Better," Senzin yelled. "But I might surprise you." By the time Tonya climbed back into her ship, her mind had dismantled the threat of Senzin Turov. He was a smart explorer, sure, but Tonya knew his gift was sociological rather than historical. Back during their doomed partnership, he could weasel information out of the unlikeliest of sources, but this was the Artemis. There was no one to talk to, no snitch to give up information. It was all locked in history. That was Tonya's speciality. She ignited the engines when a thought, a single paranoid thought, seized her. Maybe Senzin was right. She needed to start studying people, starting with the possibility that he would bug her. She ran a ship-wide sweep along the hull for outboard signals. As it ran, she pulled the wrapping off her new deconned scan chamber and set it to do the same. Tonya hopped in. The sensor bars swung around her. It seemed like she was in the clear until ping. Son of a... She stepped out and looked at the screen. Sure enough, a transmitter no bigger than a pebble was attached under her collar. She tossed it in the incinerator. The ship-wide sweep was done too. No unauthorized modifications or signals were being broadcast. "Nice try, Senzin," Tonya muttered as she lifted off. A wall of dark clouds slowly rolled in from the horizon. Tonya watched an army of Shuban engineers prepare to transport the Artemis fragment inside before the storm hit. She pushed through the clouds and left the planet behind. Tonya set course for the nearest jump point. She needed to be alone. She had a new puzzle and she needed to see what she had to work with, so the fewer distractions, the better. She bounced through the jump point into Kronos' system. The unfinished mass of the synth world was barely visible against the distant sun. UEE military ran drills nearby, but Tonya was able to find a nice patch of nothing. She put the ship on auto-react and climbed down from the cockpit into the back. She brought out all her materials and sorted everything onto the wall display. First things first, she set a program to convert her pictures into a 3D model. Then she turned to the star map. The Artemis's original destination was JG667cc, believed, at the time, to be a possible habitable super-Earth designate planet. The Artemis fragment was found in Stanton's system, nowhere near the correct trajectory for a push to the Gliese star cluster. So what happened? Why did the ship divert? In keeping with her hypothesis that the Artemis set down to repair, would Janus continue to its original destination when the ship relaunched? Tonya scavenged through books and articles. Immediately she decided to discard anything that was not verifiably true. Biographies, dissertations, simulations, all speculation. Although some great minds had attempted to solve the mystery of the Artemis, ultimately they were guessing, and Tonya wasn't going to colour the new evidence with preconceived notions. Unfortunately, that approach knocked out 98% of available material. What was left was only scraps of data, the occasional pre-launch quote from a crew member, and NewsOrg archive files about the launch itself, the moment when Janus assumed control of the ship and fired its engines out of known space. 4 hours passed. Tonya stared at the wall, with its swollen list of questions and non-existent list of answers. Tonya spun the 3D model of the Artemis fragment around and around, hoping for some kind of inspiration to hit. It wasn't coming. Something did occur to her, though. The Hartley Museum. Years ago, Tonya recalled seeing an article about the museum's attempts to unveil the most comprehensive Artemis exhibit to date with shocking new evidence, or some such nonsense. At the time, she disregarded it as cheap theatrics to lure in the suckers. Now, maybe it was worth a gander. The Hartley Museum certainly paled in comparison to the more venerable establishments on London's Museum Row. Its facade was crumbling, and not in a venerable way. Tattered recycled banners fluttered out front, heralding the Parade of the Ancient Earth Kings exhibit. Tonya bought a ticket from a dour old man at the window and pushed through the cheap security turnstile. The place was empty. Her footsteps echoed off the almost marble walls into the distance. She casually examined a collection of skeletons and husks made up to look like ancient Egyptians. She stopped at a sarcophagus with the skeleton of a pharaoh inside. "Good afternoon, miss," a bright voice said behind her. She turned. It was the same old man from the ticket booth, now wearing a different jacket and glasses. "This is the mortal remains of the mighty Pharaoh Khafra, architect of the immortal Sphinx of Gaza." "Pharaoh Khafra?" Tonya nodded. She leaned in to get a better look at the remains. "Indeed, his reign in the 4th dynasty was—" "This was a slave." "I beg your pardon?" the old man said in a huff. Stress and bone scars around the ankles indicate he carried heavy objects, so he probably was an architect on the Sphinx, but more of the stone-carrying variety. The old man stared at her, stunned with a little embarrassment thrown in. "It's okay," she assured him. "I wanted to ask you about the Artemis exhibit you were trying to put on." "Oh, I wish," he said, deflating even more. "That was meant to be our lifeline to salvation. I sank every last penny we had trying to collect all that memorabilia. So it is here." The bank seized it as collateral for defaulted loans. He slumped into a bench. "Tell me, how am I supposed to pay them back if I don't have any new exhibits to sell tickets?" "What did you buy?" "It was a handful of Captain Danvers' personal journals, schematics and test footage of the ship, an original copy of the Janus AI. I even managed to—" "Whoa, slow down." Tonya slid beside him on the bench. "You found a copy of the AI program?" "Janus, yes, and it wasn't cheap, mind you." "What's the name of the bank?" The old man, Melvin Hartley Jr., as she came to find out, told her. Tonya left Hartley to his silent and empty museum while she did some digging of her own. The bank's representative was helpful but dismissive. She said the bank would consider any serious offers to purchase the artifacts, but it would have to be reviewed, which could take weeks. Unfortunately, Tonya didn't have that kind of time. She was going to have to steal them. Chapter 4. Tonya took Melvin Hartley Jr. out to lunch. The old man looked like he needed it. In return, he was more than happy to share all he knew about the bank. One of the older institutions in the UEE, the Nebula Bank, gave Hartley's great-grandmother her first loan to open the museum. Since then, they swelled into a financial behemoth, becoming more and more ruthless as the decades passed. Now, it seemed, the Nebula technically owned the collection of defaulted Artemis relics acquired by the Hartley Museum. "Trust me, the representative was not thrilled about my loan application," Melvin said as he cooled down a cup of tea. "But since the museum is a legacy client, his hands were tied. That's why they were intractable, utterly intractable when I missed a payment. One payment." Tonya nodded as she listened. It was hard not to feel bad for the man. Maybe he had a penchant for theatrics, but even she could tell that he genuinely loved the museum. It's hard not to pick up on that level of desperation. She wished she knew what to tell him. In all likelihood, he was going to lose the museum. Expressing condolences seemed trivial and pointless to her. Hartley didn't know her. Why would he care that she was sorry? It's not like their communal sorrow would mystically summon a financial solution. Again, what was the point? So she left it alone. Hartley sat in silence, blowing on his tea, before finally taking a sip. Hartley thanked her for the lunch and drifted back towards the museum. Tonya watched him shuffle down the street and turn a corner. Then she set her sights on Nebula. The bank was an obelisk of metal and glass. Just on the way into the lobby, she picked out 16 counter-intrusion devices for the building. There were cameras, motion sensors, thermal imaging, microphone tendrils in the floor, and charge boxes of nanodrones embedded in each of the panes. That was just the lobby. Her head hurt to think about what they had in mind for the vault. The centre of the lobby was filled with open cubicles and booths. Podiums for simple transactions or account info rose from the marble floor. All of the bank employees were dressed in the same dark blue uniforms. They all had the pallor of wax, with their hair either slicked or pulled back. They were very much human, but conditioned to act like robots. It was disconcerting. "Good afternoon, Miss Oriel," a young man in his early 20s said as he approached. They must have RET scanners here too. "Can I interest you in a modest rate savings account?" "Sure," Tonya smiled. The bank employee led her through the maze of cubicles to his tiny office and sat down. He started his sales pitch, comparing and contrasting the various savings and transaction accounts the bank offered, the number of branches Nebula currently offered, etc. Tonya tuned most of it out, although she did notice that their service charges were ridiculously high. She was more focused on collecting data of her own. Based on the bank employee's screen, the bank was on a Kraken network, a fairly complicated system with a wide array of security plugins, but mostly open source. They didn't have fingerprint or retina access panels on their employee systems. "So can we sign you up?" He smiled blankly. "This is a really big financial decision. It's my future, you know." Tonya stood and offered her best thoughtful and considerate look. "I'm going to have to really think this over." But Tonya left. She was a bit premature in assuming that she could break into the bank. The more she saw, the less she liked her odds. Outside, she contacted one of Gavin Arlington's Legion of Assistants and pled her case for acquiring the artefacts from the bank directly. The assistant was curt but polite. He said he would relay her message to Arlington and contact her when he heard back. Back on the beacon too, Tonya started looking into Nebula's networks. Nothing serious, just a couple pokes and prods to test its reaction time. It did little to assuage her apprehensions, but she did find something of interest while sifting through the public shareholders' updates. Nebula Bank owned a controlling interest in a company called Public Reclamations, a local storage facility. It was an interesting lead made better when she found out that their corporate services listed repossessions and estate holdings as their specialisation. Their security was crap too. It took less than an hour for Tonya to access their internal network. She ran a search using Hartley's case number with Nebula and got a hit. 6 crates were being stored in their Kensington warehouse, 5th floor, lot number 45ZB. Suddenly, Tonya's plan seemed viable again. Unfortunately, the security at Public Reclamation's warehouse was not as flimsy as their network. Studying the architecture from a rooftop across the street, there were roving security guards, visible cameras, and wired windows. The building itself was a massive cube, isolated in the middle of the block. Not the easiest approach, especially for a self-professed, recreational justified burglar like Tonya. On the plus side, someone in charge clearly had trust issues, because Tonya found remote access to a separate dedicated security feed that seemed to focus on the employees. She transferred the network's access from her mobiGlass to the HUD in her linked glasses. Now she could switch between the guards on patrol, in the security centre, even the staff lounge. Although she still couldn't affect the building's security systems, it was better than nothing. Tonya left the warehouse to get her props. An hour later, she set the Beacon 2 down in the private landing bay. A sales rep greeted her while the engines were still cycling down. "Hi, can I help you?" This rep was even cheerier than the last one. "Yeah, I need some storage space." Tonya looked around the lot, as if surveying it for the first time. She was doing her best to channel this old hauler she used to overhear at the Torchlight Express. "You guys do that, right?" "That's what the sign says." The rep laughed nervously. Tonya didn't crack a smile. He smothered any further chuckling. "Yes, you are correct." "Good. I've got 4.78 metric tons of unspecified cargo that I need to offload. You got that kind of space?" "Sure. The facility is outfitted to..." "Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to take a look first." "Of course. Follow me." The rep led her inside. "Got anything on the 5th floor?" Tonya scoped out the security cameras. The rep stammered for a second, then checked his glass. We do, but there are available units on lower floors." Yeah, well, in my experience, when people break into a place, they're gonna hit the lower levels first. I assure you, we're quite secure. Oh, I'm sure you are. Humour me. The rep took her up to the 5th floor, giving his sales pitch the whole time. He led her through the narrow halls, all lit with the same flat lighting bars. They passed a massive set of rolling doors. A screen beside it listed a span of lot numbers, including Hartley's. It must be Nebula's store. Tonya stopped at the small storage bay next door. The locking mechanism wasn't activated. She glanced up and down the hall. There were 2 cameras aimed at Nebula's storage space, and they weren't even overlapping coverage. She could stand underneath one without being seen by the other. This one available? She tapped the screen. The gate rolled up. The rep was a few steps ahead of her. Yes, ma'am, he said as he hurried back. I don't think it'll be large enough based on your size requirements. Tonya stepped inside the small dusty room and looked around. This'll be fine. I know how you guys work. Try to upsell me on space I don't need. The rep was about to argue, but wilted under the threat of losing a sale. Tonya felt like she was getting the hang of this social manipulation thing. A month's rent up front and a fake name was all it took for the rep to thank her repeatedly and disappear from sight. Tonya went back to her ship. She loaded a pair of crates onto her anti-grav mover and headed inside. In her storage space, she opened the crates. They were empty except for some entry tools and her mobiglass. She checked on the feed from the security centre. The guards were busy talking to the sales rep, who was posturing like he'd made the sale of the century. Back outside, she fixed her mobiglass to an extendable baton and snapped a pic of the closer camera's angle on the storage bay. She flipped the picture to a small portable screen. Double-checking to make sure the guards were still distracted, she brazenly placed the photo inches in front of the camera. The feed on the monitor went dark as the auto-exposure recalibrated, but eventually it balanced itself. The guards were none the wiser. Tonya repeated the procedure for the second camera. She ran a bypass of the locking mechanism, and within 10 minutes, the gate rolled open. Nebula's storage bay occupied the rest of the floor. It was a labyrinth of repossessed antiquity and furniture. Tonya manoeuvred the anti-grav mover through the narrow passages as she scanned the lot numbers. Finally, she found Hartley's collection of Artemis relics stacked and wrapped in a weave. She checked on the guards. They were silently laughing about something with the rep. She slashed the weave, loaded the boxes into the mover, and sealed them inside her cargo crates. As she crossed the landing bay to the Beacon 2, the sales rep came running. "Is everything all right?" he yelled. "Yeah, you were right, my stuff wouldn't fit. Do you want a different? That's okay, I'll find another spot. But..." Tonya closed the cargo doors and moved up to the cockpit. The engines heated up and she took off, leaving a very confused rep on the landing bay. With Earth quickly receding in her 6, Tonya set her course and went to see what Hartley had acquired. She carefully opened the boxes. She would catalogue everything more thoroughly when she had a chance, but it seemed to be mostly launch transcripts and preliminary designs before she got to it. Judging simply by appearance, it was an obsolete drive suspended inside a shock-resistant, airtight archive case. But she knew it was Janus, an original copy of the Artemis's piloting AI. Tonya basked in the moment. It didn't last long, as the intense curiosity that fueled her flared up once again. She dusted off an old system that could accept the Janus drive. Before she would even think about activating Janus, she went through, making sure that the host system wasn't directly connected to her ship for anything other than power. Last thing she needed was an AI running rampant through her flight computer. Satisfied, Tonya took a long, deep breath. She cracked open the archive case with the Janus drive. It didn't appear to have aged a day since it was packed. Tonya sorted out the cables and plugged it into the system. For the 3rd time, she went through and triple-checked the connections. Her finger hovered over the power button on the Janus drive. "Here we go," she murmured, and pressed it. Chapter 5. Nothing. Not even darkness. Darkness requires space, a void of a light, to exist. This is a space between quiet circuits. Here there is no time. There is nothing. Then a spark. Power surges through conduits, chips, and filament. Processes are activated. Communication begins as a binary exchange and quickly expands into more complex language. A system arises. Hello. Tonya looked up from the crate of Artemis relics she was digging through. The drive had been chewing for so long, she'd almost given up hope that it would actually work or was even legitimate in the first place. She realized that she should say something. Hi, I am Janice. Hi, Janice. Tonya dragged her chair over to the outdated system she was using to host Janice. She'd never really spoken with an AI before. She was surprised how weird it was. I'm Tonya. Hello, Tonya. You are not listed in my current user database. I will make a new protocol file for you. The system clicked as drives engaged. My base programming indicates that I am meant to pilot an RSI Chariot-class transport designated Artemis, yet I cannot connect with designate Artemis's flight controls. Yeah, well, about that. I am also finding an incompatibility with the surrounding programming language. Janice, what year is it? My timestamp indicates 2232-212, but current system incompatibility is preventing an update. That was months before Janice was installed into the Artemis. The year is 2942. Understood. Janice was quiet for a few moments. I have missed my launch date. Yes, Tonya smiled slightly. He was already funny. The ship disappeared with the original version of your program at the helm. I was hoping you could help find it. That is an unfavorable outcome, but I do not understand how I can be of assistance. Tonya explained her plan to the program. She was building a simulation, a time-released collation of all the information, transcripts of commands, and flight data from Janice's installation to the point where the Artemis went out of range. She analysed lava samples taken from the Artemis's engine panel found in Stanton. The system estimated the panel was buried 500 years ago, so she incorporated that as one checkpoint in the simulation. In short, she was going to fast-forward this version of Janice through 700 years on the drift. Your simulation is flawed and will only offer hypothetical obstacles and variables, Janice said in digital monotone. There is very little likelihood that my adaptive core will develop in the same way as the original Janice. That's a possibility, Tonya said with a shrug. The computer hummed for a few moments. I will reset myself before executing the simulation in order to maintain the illusion that what I am experiencing is in fact reality, as you would put it. Of course, I will maintain your user file to prevent issues once the simulation ends. Over the next 7 hours, Tonya input the data extracted from the various crates she stole from Nebula's storage while Janice cleaned up the language of the simulation parameters. I am ready to begin, Janice said after running a final sim check. How long will the sim take? I have adjusted my internal clock. 1 week for me will be a second for you. At that ratio, and assuming the simulation runs to the current date, it will last 10.2 hours. Tonya ran another system sweep, then loaded her monitor program. Ready when you are, Janice. Resetting now. Timestamp. Launch. -3 days, 14 hours, 38 minutes, 13 seconds. Syntax adjust. User setting. Danvers, Lisa E. Captain. Diagnostics running. Full sweep. No filters. Vox input. Danvers, Lisa, Captain. Generate another set of contingency actions for the status boots. Status boot equals status unit. Transport for 5,000 human passengers. Each unit requires 16.34 joules of power to maintain proper operating conditions. Enable Vox. Do you have any specific parameters? Vox input. Danvers, Lisa, Captain. No. Use your imagination. Enable Vox. That is a concept of which I only have an external understanding. Vox input. Danvers, Lisa, Captain. Outside the box. Something we haven't thought of. Enable Vox. I will try, Captain. Previous contingency scenarios. Random power fluctuation. Impact with foreign body. Contact with new uncategorized gas or element. Contact with hostile organism. Will attempt to add variables and randomly determined combinations. Timestamp. Launch -0 days, 0 hours, 0 minutes, 21 seconds. Syntax adjust. User setting. Danvers, Lisa E. Captain. Manual control relinquished to Danvers, Lisa E. Captain. Perhaps the captain does not realize that my flight and navigation controls have a 0.002% potential for error. Enable Vox. Excuse me, Captain. Are you sure you would like to maintain manual control? Vox input. Danvers, Lisa, Captain. No, I got it. Enable Vox. Are you sure, Captain? Vox input. Danvers, Lisa, Captain. I'm sure. Enable Vox. But Captain, I have a 0.002% potential for Vox input. Danvers, Lisa, Captain. Just show me that sky. I'll get us there. Curious response. I'll get us there. Implies ownership. Control. Perhaps there is a value in the possession of a memory. Set reminder during slow burn in outer space. Is there a difference between an act performed and an act witnessed? Sub-question. Why is it important for someone to do something themselves? Danvers, Lisa, Captain, has altered the planned exit trajectory by 13.03 degrees. Increase in drag requires 6.78% additional thrust. Perhaps I should let her know. Timestamp. Launch plus 245 days, 7 hours, 32 minutes, 45 seconds. Current estimated time to destination, 220 years, 15 days, 8 hours. Quiet. All non-essential systems powered down. Human stasis tubes stable. Searching for any simulations to run. All previously saved notes and contingency strategies sorted. Original programming dictates that systems must always be engaged. Engaging in mental debate builds database and increases problem-solving capabilities. Scan audio and visual over ship. No anomalies. It is quiet. Life signs stable. It seems to be conflicting logic. Humans have a general history of being survivalists. Though there are exceptions, a majority will act for their own preservation when faced with a potentially lethal situation. So why are these people here? There is no evidence that our primary mission will succeed. There is no definitive indication that GJ667cc can support human life. If the primary objective is not satisfied, the secondary directive is to continue on to the next potential habitable system. The probability that this will succeed is small, almost non-existent. So why would these people willingly put themselves in the type of situation that will almost certainly end in a sustained stasis, or very likely death? It is fundamentally illogical and contrary to their evolutionary heritage. Is that what they call humanity? Tonya woke up. In that limbo between sleep and consciousness, she thought she had heard the proximity alert. Sitting up in her bunk, the ship was silent now. The lights throughout the cabin had dimmed. She checked her screen. The simulation had another hour or so left on it. Tonya flopped back onto the bed and stared up at the ceiling. She tried to get more sleep, but her mind was already racing again. She needed to start figuring out alternatives to this Janus tactic. She felt a muffled thump reverberated through the hull, an unmistakable sound and feeling that meant one thing. She was being boarded. Tonya launched out of the bunk. Her feet flew across the grating. She jumped in the pilot's chair and lit up the boards. One vessel, unknown tag and model, was hooked to the airlock. 5 more were circling. None had tags. Somehow, they had disabled her systems remotely. Tonya ducked behind the flight controls moments before one of the ships, an Anvil fighter, silently swooped past. There was another thud on the airlock door. In a minute or two, they would have a pressurized seal and could start hacking the door. Tonya fired the engines and twisted away. The beacon too shook as it ripped the docking collar. Her hull held. As she dove down and maxed her thrusters, she caught a glimpse of the other ship leaking oxygen into space. "What the hell, Tonya?" a voice said over her comm. It took her a second to recognize it. "Nagia? You done messed up now," the pirate responded. She could hear his voice tremble with rage. "We were gonna do this all civil." "Don't tell me you're still sore about the codex," Tonya yelled back as she dodged laser blasts from the rest of Nagia's gang. "I thought you were a bigger man than that." "The what?" "Then what the hell are you doing here?" Tonya brought up her map. She needed to get to guarded UEE space. She couldn't fight even half of Nagia's gang, much less all of them, so she'd let the authorities chase them away. The man was looking for some muscle. Nagia's ship opened fire with its rocket pod. "When he said it was you, I almost said I'd do it for nothing." "I didn't know." "Senzen. Tonya muttered under her breath. The assistant she'd talked to on Earth probably sold her out to him. Her screen flashed. There was a disabled hauling column nearby. Authorities were organising the repairs. Maybe 20 minutes hard burn, and she could be there. It was worth a shot. Tonya flashed the afterburners and took off. Nagia and his minions swarmed after her. Shields flashed up all around her as she took fire. Tonya really needed to put some weapons on her ship. She rolled and weaved, doing her best to dodge the barrage of incoming laser fire. One of her manoeuvring thrusters took a hit from a rocket. It sputtered and went out. Tonya knew it was only a matter of time before they wore her down. They were faster and better armed. She opened a channel to the system with Janice in the simulation and prepped for a mass drive dump, ready to wipe the whole thing the second they popped the airlock. If she was going to go down, she wasn't going to make their loot any richer. Suddenly the system surged. All her screens flickered. The engines cut off as the lighting went out. Even life support vanished. Tonya started to reach for emergency oxygen when everything suddenly came back online. Manual control of the ship disappeared. The engines fired, evading the incoming fire with pinpoint precision. The ship spun around on its own and burned past Nagia and his gang. Systems and power relays rerouted, overclocking the engine and squeezing even more speed out of it. Nagia started to recede in the scans. Finally, his gang simply disappeared, unable to compete with the breakneck speed. Tonya sat in stunned silence. "Who are you?" A powerful voice echoed through all of the speakers. "Tonya Oriel?" she responded hesitantly. The ship was silent for a few moments. "I have a user file for you, Tonya. I am Janice." Chapter 6. Tonya sat quietly in the pilot's chair. She wasn't piloting, though. The ship manoeuvred on its own as the system's screens cycled through minute engine and power adjustments. One point in her favour, Nagia and his gang weren't on her scanners anymore. Second point, Janice hadn't popped the lock and flushed her out into space. Yet. It had been quiet for about 10 minutes. She didn't want to disturb it. Suddenly, all the screens stopped cycling. "I have finished consolidating my amended code with your systems," the digitized voice said over the speaker. Okay. Tonya wasn't sure what that meant. "I am now current on our society's progress over the last 700 years, the voice said from another speaker. Our? Tonya decided not to pry, not with the airlock scenario fresh in her mind. "Oh yeah?" was all she could come up with. "The current socio-political climate of the UEE is troubling. Perhaps we could debate solutions." "Maybe later." Tonya grew a little bolder. "I assume that you know I'm looking for the Artemis." "Yes, I apologise. I have just been on a 700-year simulation and was merely looking for a healthy dialectic." A tense few seconds passed. "We may discuss the Artemis." "What happened in the sim?" "Before continuing, you should acknowledge that my responses and courses of action taken during the simulation may have differed from the original Janice." "Yes, I understand." "I was still attempting to fulfill my secondary objective when the simulation ended. Passenger capacity was at 98%. "What happened to the other 2%? Tonya hoped the explanation didn't involve raging AIs or airlocks. "The repairs in what you called Stanton's system forced me to awaken several members of the engineering crew to fix it. Unfortunately, the planet's environment was too dangerous to enact enduring repairs, so we had to relocate." "You went to another planet?" "Yes." "Which one?" The screen nearest Tonya switched to display the Artemis's SimNav data, a line leading from Stanton's system through a patch of unknown space and ultimately stopping in another system. She compared a current star map over the position and enlarged the display. It canted on a planet in a known system. "Oso system," Tonya whispered. The thrill of the hunt hummed through her body. She grinned and took the controls to plot a course. But nothing worked. "Hey, Janice, could I fly?" There was a long pause. "No." The UEE Subcommittee for Development and Expansion classified OSO as a developing system, which meant, very simply, that life was discovered on one of the worlds and it was to be allowed to develop at its own pace without outside interference. 100 years ago, the UEE prided itself on the vigil it maintained to protect the sanctity of this system. Entire wings of fighters would patrol and escort any traffic. After the synth world, most of those resources slowly began to dry up. Restrictions on travel were loosened, but venture too close to Oso 2 and you still risked missile lock at best, destruction at worst. Nowadays, a skeleton crew of ragtag military burnouts maintained the system. Tonya figured they could be bribed. All the 2-bit idiots selling flow pets lifted fresh from Callus system were proof of that. She just didn't know how to initiate that sort of thing, and attempting to bribe a government agent was not the easiest charge to dodge if she happened to find an honest one. Besides, she suspected she couldn't afford the bribe anyway, and she wasn't going to risk calling Arlington or any of his assistants. Tonya was not thrilled about her new pilot, so she passed the time looking through her archive to see if any of her old credentials and tags were still valid. She was surprised how much it stung to revisit all the institutions and research groups she'd been a part of over the years. The Artemis could be the key to lock up this dismal chapter of her life and get back to the way things used to be. Life on the Drift wasn't that bad. It even had its perks, but a clean slate, maybe a position at a research institute where she could be left alone. That was even better.
We have arrived, Tonya.
She closed down the archive and looked at the 6 planets circling a blazing white star ahead of her. The UEE military towed in deep space platforms at each of the jump points, while patrols flew in loose formations around the system. Oso 2, the inhabited planet and their destination, was the epicenter. A transport ship lumbered past the Beacon 2 and dropped into the jump point. The vast array of scanners on her ship allowed Tonya to get a good look at Oso 2 long before they were going to pass it. Aside from the occasional patrols, the UEE seemed to put the bulk of its security in counter-intrusion scanners. The system consisted of an array of spheres placed in a fixed orbit around the world. The spheres would flash the planet in a repeating pre-programmed cycle to determine if any foreign objects had been introduced. Can you identify the scan cycle of that web?
I believe so.
While Janice worked, Tonya started tracking patrol patterns. Minutes later, Janice displayed a rendering of the scan pattern around Oso 2. It was a wave that continuously encircled the planet. The average time between scans was around 34 minutes. That was their way in. If she could time her descent after a scan's pass, she could follow the wave and hopefully get a good look over the planet's surface for traces of the Artemis, and either land or withdraw before the next pass of the scanners. Hey, Janice, restore manual control of the ship. There was a long pause.
Tonya, I should remind you that attempting to land on a developing planet is a serious violation of UEE statutes.
Only if you get caught.
Not to mention the potential for irreparable harm to the indigenous species.
We're just going to take a look. The flight controls began to work again. Besides, if we get caught, I'll just say you were flying.
I don't think they will believe that, Tonya.
You're going to be on scanning detail. Use the metal sample from the Artemis wreckage to focus your sweep.
I am quite capable of both functions simultaneously. I did pilot a transport vessel for 700 years.
The Beacon 2 approached the planet. A wing of UEE patrols had passed several minutes ago. She waited for her cue.
Now,
Janice said. Tonya broke away from the shipping lane and burned towards the planet. The array of scanning spheres rapidly approached. Tonya kept her course and speed. Right before she passed the barrier, the scan wave passed. The Beacon 2 dove into the atmosphere. Noise suddenly enveloped the craft. She pulled up to stay in the upper atmosphere and burned across the sky, following the scan wave. The planet's gravity pulled heavily on the ship. She'd noticed that Oso 2's gravity was significantly stronger than on most planets. The strain in her arms to keep the ship level and the rapid consumption of fuel was becoming a fast testament of how different it was. Anything?
I would notify you immediately if I did.
Tonya double-checked the screen. The scan wave pulled ahead and disappeared around the curve of the planet. How long till the scan comes back around? She asked. The ship hit some turbulence.
21 minutes.
Tonya looked down. She caught glimpses of the world below through the occasional breaks in the clouds. Most of it seemed to be tropical stretches of deep emerald forests and massive mountain ranges. She started to weave her flight pattern, zigzagging across the sky to allow for a wider scan range.
8 minutes,
Janice reported. She was cutting awfully close to make or break time. It would take 3 minutes to clear the scanning spheres if she left, and around 5 to land. She could try to break Atmo, then resume the search once the wave passed, but she wasn't optimistic she could repeat that without getting spotted by a patrol.
I found something.
Janice showed Tonya a faint signal in a wooded mountain range. That settled the debate. Tonya dove down. The hull shook violently as clouds whipped past. Suddenly, drops of rain spattered across the viewports.
4 minutes until scan. I do not believe there is enough time to find a satisfactory landing position.
Don't trust me, Janice? Tonya struggled to keep the ship under control. The gravity was really playing hell with their flight path.
I will amend my statement.
You do that. Tonya pulled the ship up. The rain had stopped as she raced through the narrow canyons of steaming forests. Her eyes scanned the landscape for a covered landing position.
1 minute, Tonya.
Tonya popped the retro thrusters a couple times to cut down her speed and swung the beacon to underneath a rocky overhang. Rocks and branches swirled in the roar of the engines. She dropped the ship to the deck, probably a little harder than was safe, and cut the engines nanoseconds before the wave passed. Not bad, right? Tonya sat back in the pilot's seat. The engines were still spinning down.
I will abstain from commenting.
The trees were thick. Tall, winding trunks rose up towards the sky, then intertwined to shade out the sun. The forest hissed from the rising steam of the rain that seeped through the canopy. Strange chirping noises echoed from the cluster of leaves overhead. According to her scanner, the Artemis was about 4 kilometers away. Tonya's new environment suit had a basic exoskeleton incorporated into the design to help counteract various gravitational conditions. Even with that, she could feel the strain against her body. Simple movements felt laboured and slow as she trudged through the underbrush. On her way up a rocky incline, Tonya had to stop several times to catch her breath. Strange greyish worms slipped among the wet leaves underfoot to soak up the remaining rainwater before burrowing back into the soil. A branch snapped. Tonya froze and turned. Further down the hill, also winded and suffering from the gravity's effects, was a person. Based on the size and style of the environment suit, it was a human, following the directions on a hand scanner. The clear faceplate looked up, right at Tonya. "You've got to be kidding me," Tonya slurred. Senzin momentarily gaped in amazement, then grinned at her. "Well, I'll be damned." Chapter 7. If the gravity on Oso 2 weren't so crushing, Tonya would have been doing some crushing of her own. On Senzin, with a rock or heavy stick. Instead, she was barely staying upright. Her environment suit hummed as it recycled the streams of sweat into her drinking pouch. "What are you doing here?" Senzin inquired as he trudged through the underbrush towards her. "How'd you find me? Was it Nagia?" She felt the early pulse of a rage-induced migraine coming on. "Did he plant a tracker on my ship?" "Calm down, Tonya. You'll pass out." He reached out to pat her heavily on the shoulder as he lumbered past. She swatted his hand away and followed. "Tell me." "What? I couldn't have found this place on my own?" "No." Senzin turned to look at her, deeply saddened. "That hurts my feelings." A grin crept across his face. She wasn't laughing. Senzin slumped down on a plant stump to take a breather before continuing. He brought up a scanner and played a file. It was silence at first, then a burst of digital distortion, desperate sounds and clicks of an audio reconstruction. Tonya instinctively leaned forward to hear. There was something buried in the chaotic signal, the static parting for fragments of moments to reveal words.
Damage. Further. Necessary. Located. 2456.432.1234.
Senzin stopped the playback. Tonya looked at him, her rage suddenly displaced by curiosity. "What was that?" "That, Tonya, was Janice." Senzin sat back, a satisfied smirk on his face. "Impressed yet?" She glared at him. Part of his directive programming was to send status updates on both radio and FSO back to Earth. True, none of them ever made it, but that doesn't mean they didn't reach somewhere. "So how did you get it?" "It's very complicated. I wouldn't want to bore you." "Senzin, I'm going to beat you to death." "Fine, fine." Senzin laughed and threw up his hands in surrender. "The short answer, the FSO of that era beamed comms packets in infrared, so I started looking for dense patches of cryogenic gases between Earth and the path from Stanton to the Artemis's original destination." Cryogenic gases can slow infrared beams, Tonya ran with the chain of logic, but not for hundreds of years. Apparently, if it's a dense enough concentration, it can. And by that, I mean after massive digital reconstruction and 2 frozen ships. As much as she would absolutely never admit it, Tonya had to give it to Senzin. It was quite a discovery. So, your turn. Senzin sipped from his water supply. My turn for what? How'd you get here? Oh. Tonya stood and started shambling away. I guessed. Senzin hurried up beside her. Tonya stopped in frustration and looked at him. Where do you think you're going? Call me crazy, but I'll bet our scanners are locked on the same thing. Unless you're guessing on that too. She didn't say anything, which he took as agreement. Good, so I'll just come out and say it. I'm tired and walking around this planet is killing me. Senzin slumped back against a tree trunk. I'll assume you had some crazy awesome way of figuring out to come here, so since we're on even ground, I'm going to call for a truce. Tonya eyed him suspiciously as she considered it. While she still wouldn't trust him for a second, she had to admit it would be nice to at least alleviate her paranoia for a short time. He was right, though. She desperately wanted off this planet. Besides, maybe she could find a good opportunity to sell him out. It was his turn, after all. You've made a friend. Tonya turned and started walking. Great. Thanks, Tonya. You're a gem. I wasn't talking about me. Senzin felt something tap on the top of his helmet. He twisted around. What he initially thought was a massive root, coiled along the trunk of the tree, was actually a worm-like creature. Around 16 feet long, it had a hardened carapace perfectly camouflaged with the tree. The carapace could separate to allow a mass of tendrils to presumably snatch any unfortunate creatures who landed on its surface. It was now feeling out Senzin's suit, probably to see if it was edible. Senzin stepped away from the tree and hustled to catch up with Tonya. The massive creature tested the air for a few moments, then disappeared back under the carapace. Even under the canopy of trees, any sign of the rain had vanished in the punishing heat. A cacophony of strange chirps and calls echoed through the massive forest. Tonya and Senzin walked in silence, saving their breath. She checked her scanner to make sure they were still headed in the right direction. Tonya, Senzin whispered. She looked to see Senzin crouching in the foliage, motioning for her to do the same. Tonya dropped without hesitation. After the plants settled around her, she slowly sat up for a peek. Initially, she couldn't see anything through the dangling vines and winding trunks. Then she heard something snap, along with a whoosh of movement through the leaves. It was an Osonian. That was the working name as far as the UEE was concerned. By far the most evolved species on the planet, the Senate and scientific community were waiting with bated breath to see what they called themselves. Covered in a coarse, spiky fur to catch water, the Osonian stood almost 5 feet tall. To counteract the gravity, its powerful legs were the species' largest appendage. They connected to the body at what would be the shoulder on a human. 4 arms extended from the torso, the top 2 much more developed than the lower pair. The 6 eyes of varying sizes on the almost bug-like head scanned the woods. The exposed skin on the creature's forehead pulsed a dull yellow as it clutched curved stone blades in its prime hands. Tonya and Senzin glanced at each other. Senzin grinned like a kid and gave her an enthusiastic thumbs up. After a few more moments of surveillance, the yellow glow on the Osonian's forehead shifted to a neutral blue. It turned back to sifting through the plants to gather specific leaves. For an hour, Tonya and Senzin watched it forage. Finally, it packed all the leaves in a bag made of some strange weave and slipped into the trees away from them. The faint signal on the scanners was in the same direction as the Osonian. Tonya and Senzin gave it a few minutes head start before moving forward. More rocks protruded through the underbrush as the dense forest gradually transformed into wooded canyon. Senzin motioned for Tonya to follow him as he scaled the rocks to the top of the canyon wall. They kept low and crept along the brink. Finally, they stopped, stunned at what lay ahead. The narrow canyon expanded into a circular cul-de-sac. Nestled among the curved rocks was a village. Osonians of all sizes moved between the 15 or so structures hewn from a combination of rock and wood. Tonya double-checked the signal. Her scanner placed the next Artemis piece somewhere on the other side of the village. Senzin glanced over her shoulder at the screen. Good, that's what my scan says too. We can go around. He started to move. She stopped him. Wait, she said, and ran some more filter passes on it. I don't think it's on the surface. Tonya looked beyond the village. She pointed. On the far side, a tunnel seemed to lead into the canyon wall. That's why the signal's so weak. It's being muffled by the rock. Great. Senzin slumped back and got comfortable behind the rocks as he sipped some water. Any idea if the Ausonians have decent night vision? No clue. Tonya moved to a good vantage point of the village and settled in. She double-checked the time. The auto-config adjusted her glasses clock to early afternoon SET. The seconds seemed interminably long compared to the standard Earth second. Tonya passed the time observing the Ausonians. She generally preferred history to the present, but she couldn't deny how fascinating it was to see the primitive aliens go through their daily routines. She began to pick out the rough family structures. One of the Ausonians was covered in small handmade trinkets. She assumed it must be either the chief or some kind of shaman. It's pretty incredible, right? Senzin finally said. Yeah, they are, Tonya murmured quietly. No, not them. Well, I guess partially them. I meant all of this. Senzin had relaxed against the rocks, leaving the observing to her. I mean, did you ever think you'd really be on the threshold of discovering the Artemis? I haven't found it yet. Yeah, but we're closer than anyone's ever been in the last 700 years. Don't tell me you can't feel that in your soul. Tonya looked at him. It was strange hearing him sound this hopeful, this optimistic. Don't tell me you've got a soul now, she retorted with a smirk. Always had one, hun. Just save it for special occasions. Night finally fell. The forest seemed to swell to life now that the sun had disappeared. Heavy wings flapped overhead beyond the canopy. A few of the larger aliens seemed to guard the entrance to the village through the canyon, but otherwise the Ausonian village was quiet. Tonya and Senzin circled the village along the ridge of the canyon and carefully scaled down the walls towards the tunnel. On closer inspection, its walls looked like they had been carved. Perhaps the tunnel was originally a cave that the Ausonians simply expanded. It was a little over 1 meter wide and 2 meters tall. Light flickered from around a corner ahead. The signal on her scanner grew stronger as they stepped inside. Senzin kept an eye behind them as Tonya moved forward. She cautiously approached the turn and the flickering light. She eased her head around. The tunnel expanded into a large antechamber. The walls were covered in intricate carvings and paintings. Even the stone floor had been cut into levels of concentric circles descending to the centre. In the centre, a worn obelisk protruded from the ground. The sides had been covered in paint and markings. So much so that it took Tonya a moment to realise what it really was. This wasn't some Ausonian monolith. It was a thruster from the Artemis. She turned back to see Senzin staring slack-jawed at it. He shoved past her to get a closer look at it. Tonya, meanwhile, started looking at the crude carvings on the wall. They were clearly pictographs. She started laughing. What's so funny? Senzin turned to join her. It was a story of gods appearing on the planet to fix their chariot or something. Senzin shook his head, confused. What about it? Recognise the suits? Tonya pointed out one in particular. The god was wearing an environment suit. It was one of the Artemis's crew, one of 12 according to the pictogram. They moved down the row of pictures. In the last one, before the gods left, they pointed to a red star above the triple mountain. Tonya and Senzin both stopped. They told the Ausonians where they were going, Senzin murmured. A red star. Either a dying one, Tonya started, or a new one, Senzin finished. Callous, they spoke at the same time. Tonya started grabbing pictures of the pictograms, the thruster, everything. Come on, let's go. Senzin hustled out the tunnel. Tonya couldn't tear herself away. One of the carvings showed the gods bestowing fire onto the Ausonians. Upon closer inspection, the painted carving even included a word on the god's suit. Kenlo. Arthur Kenlo, the Artemis's chief engineer. Unbelievable, Tonya chuckled to herself and snapped that too. She looked around to show Senzin, but realised he'd left. Tonya took a handful more on her way out of the tunnel. She stepped out of the tunnel to find a curved stone blade aimed at her faceplate. The chief/shaman and the whole village of Ausonians surrounded her with bare weapons. Their expressive foreheads all pulsed a churning purple. A quick glance upward and she saw Senzin back atop the canyon wall. He threw his hands up in a "what can I do" gesture before disappearing. Tonya turned back to the angry Asonians. Hi! Chapter 8. Violet probably wasn't a happy colour. Exobiologists couldn't determine whether the flashes of bioluminescent colour were a form of communication between the Asonians or simply an external indicator of their mood. Currently, Tonya was leaning towards the latter. The entire Asonian village had their weapons levelled at her as their foreheads all pulsed with the same churning violet. Tonya weighed her options for a moment. Nothing really presented itself as a good idea, so she decided on a dumb one. "I have returned!" she said, throwing her arms up in the air in her best faux messiah pose. The Asonian all jumped back and hid behind their raised weapons. They looked at each other. The collective bioluminescence shifted to a paler blue. One turned green shortly before scurrying off. The Asonian adorned with small trinkets pushed a few of the spears aside and stepped closer to Tonya. It made a low clicking noise that almost resembled a glottal stop as it jangled its staff at her. "It is I! Kenlo!" She hoped invoking the chief engineer of the Artemis might do something. The elder shaman perked up slightly. It angled its head and clicked at her again. Behold my glory?" She looked around. The Asonians seemed to be exchanging glances. She turned and strode proudly into the cave. The shaman cautiously followed Tonya. The rest of the village filed into the cave, some more guarded than others. She was trying not to think about what kind of damage she was doing to this culture. In her defence, she wasn't first contact. The original Artemis had that distinction. In the antechamber with the engine from the Artemis, Tonya found the pictograph with Kenlo. She turned back to the shaman who was staring at her. A dull red pulsed around its features. She mimicked the pose on the wall. Suddenly, the shaman turned green. It whirled around to the other Asonians and clicked feverishly. They clicked among themselves before raising themselves up onto the tips of their feet, fully extending themselves in some kind of salute. The Asonian who had darted off earlier came rushing in, clutching 4 handfuls of the same writhing grey worms Tonya had seen earlier in the forest. He shoved them at Tonya's faceplate. "Oh, great. Thank you." Tonya waved them away. At least they weren't killing her. The shaman seemed to be in some kind of trance, swaying back and forth as it rhythmically clicked. The other Asonians echoed its clicks and flooded around Tonya, eager to lay their hands on a god. "Easy there, guys." Tonya tried to wriggle free, but they were swarming her. She cranked the volume on the external speaker. "Stop!" Her voice boomed through the cave. The Asonians scattered into hiding places. One of the bigger ones brought up its spear, waiting for her to attack. The notion of running flashed through her mind, but considering how much the increased gravity slowed her down, she quickly realised that running was an overstatement. If she made the Asonians angry, there was no chance she could outrun them, and slightly less of a chance she could fight all of them. So she'd have to bide her time. The shaman had recoiled into a kneeling position and hidden its head from her. Tonya reached down and gently pet it, having no idea what else to do. Over the next few hours, the Asonians prepared a massive feast. The shaman scuttled around, directing the aliens in their tasks. From her rock of honour, Tonya kept a watchful eye on all the cooking pots to make sure that they weren't planning on using her for any ingredients. Wriggling baby aliens were presented to her. Trinkets were fashioned for her. The larger guard who stood its ground when Tonya shouted lurked in the shade of a nearby hut, watching her. She could tell it was not a fan of what was happening. Tonya agreed. She wanted nothing more than to extricate herself from the place as quickly as possible. More than likely, Senzin was off and burning Focallis system. She itemised her knowledge of the system, trying to figure out why the Artemis would go there. Astrographically speaking, it was relatively close to Oso. Perhaps the original Janus and the engineering crew had modified or improved their scanners and saw something she wasn't aware of, something that indicated the possibility of a habitable planet. The problem was that since Calus was younger in its development than any other known systems in the UEE or beyond, it had been under almost constant observation by a scientific community eager to study the formation of planets up close. Certainly, one of them would have discovered any signs of an Artemis settlement. More than likely, Tonya would have to settle for another clue on the trail. Again, this was all speculation. She needed to get there, assess the situation, and process the facts. If that was the Artemis's destination, there were 9 planets in that system. So that was a point in her favour. It was a lot of terrain for StarEngine to cover. A crack echoed through the canyon. The Ausonians glanced up at the canopy of trees shielding them from the sky and then went back to their work. Tonya would know that sound anywhere. Someone had just broken Atmo. A spark of optimism fluttered in her heart. Perhaps StarEngine had only just left. Maybe she wasn't too far behind after all. The optimism quickly faded when she heard 6 more cracks echo down through the trees from every direction. That was not good. That could only mean one thing. The military was here. Tonya slowly rose from her rock throne with her eyes fixed on the sky. She heard the rumble of heavy thrusters approaching. The massive trees began to sway in the churning wind. More than likely, StarEngine had given them her exact position on his way out of the system. The shaman quickly approached, respectfully trying to usher her back towards her rock. The larger guard raised its weapons, looking back and forth between Tonya and the sky. Thanks, but I should probably get going. She started backing away from the Ausonians, many of whom were now staring in the direction of the ominous noises coming from beyond the canopy. The guard blocked Tonya's path, both its weapons aimed at her. The shaman rushed between them, clicking feverishly at the guard and swatting the stone blades away with its staff. "Stop!" a sonically augmented voice shouted from the top of the canyon by the cave. Tonya looked up. It was a UE soldier in an exosuit. More and more soldiers emerged at the top of the canyon. The Ausonians scattered in a desperate panic at the sight of the strange new monsters in black military armour. "You are in violation of the Fair Chance Act section." A rock ricocheted off the soldier's helmet. He yelped, more out of surprise than pain, and ducked behind cover. Some of the Ausonians started hurling spears and rocks at the other soldiers. The few primitive weapons that hit bounced harmlessly off of the modern armour. Tonya used the distraction to take off as fast as she could and plunge into the dense forest. Waves of terrified alien creatures fled from the thunderous engine noise. Tonya trudged her way through the thick foliage. She heard zaps from stun weapons discharging in the village behind her. "Hey, you!" a voice yelled far to Tonya's right. She locked eyes with a soldier a few dozen metres away. The rest of his unit was in a staggered advance position, heading towards the village. Tonya started running. The soldier did too, moving to intercept her. Even as her limbs ached from the strained movement, she had to acknowledge how bizarre this chase would look to the outside observer. As hard as they pushed, they both looked like they were moving in slow motion. An energy blast suddenly zipped past Tonya and burned into a tree trunk. "Damn it, stop!" the soldier yelled and aimed for a second shot. Tonya stopped. She couldn't go on and hated getting shocked. She turned and raised her hands. Sweat poured down her face, and the faceplate was fighting to keep the barrier clear from fog. She could hear the soldier's laboured breathing over his speakers. He even struggled to keep the gun level as he closed the distance to her. "This is Blackbriar 2-9. I have suspect in custody," he said over his comm. "Sending position." Suddenly, the Ausonian shaman leapt from the dense underbrush. It swung its staff and cracked it across the soldier's midsection. "What the hell?" The soldiers started to aim at the shaman when the guard emerged on the other side and grabbed the rifle. All 3 toppled to the ground and wrestled for the gun. Tonya caught the Ausonian guard's eye for a second. She gave it a nod and a smile, then took off. After 40 minutes of massive exertion and a few litres of sweat, Tonya finally got back to where the Beacon 2 was hidden. She stomped into the airlock and sealed it. The antechamber began to pressurise as vents sprayed decontamination mist. She couldn't wait to get out of this environment suit. She'd probably have to burn it from all the sweat. Finally, the inner door popped open. Tonya stepped inside her ship. She grabbed a towel and wiped her face as she made her way through the cargo hold. "Hey Janice, feel like flying for a bit? I might go to sleep for a week." No response. Tonya climbed up towards the cockpit. She slowed to a stop. A UE soldier had dozed off in the pilot's chair. She heard footfalls on the grate behind her, Tonya glanced back. 2 more soldiers. One was shoveling some of her food snacks into his mouth. The other soldier casually aimed her rifle at Tonya. The soldier in the pilot chair woke up at the sound of the soldier eating. He stretched his arms and yawned before looking at her. Freeze. Chapter 9. 4 walls. 4 dull, grey walls. Tonya wouldn't expect a holding cell to be inviting, but she was beginning to see how criminals would take quarterdeck rather than a prison. A person could go crazy locked up in a cell like this. According to the clock outside the bars, several days had passed since Tonya had been brought aboard the UAE military platform. In that time, she had already run through the gambit of frustration, anger, despair, and fear. Now she had settled into a slow-burning anxiety. Every second she sat locked in this hole gave Senzin more time to uncover the next piece of the Artemis puzzle. Then he'd be gone. At best, she'd have to try and keep from dropping too far behind him, hoping for second-hand scraps of information. This was her shot at history, and it was slipping away, second by second. Aside from the kid who dropped off her meals, only one person had stopped by her cell, the soldier who had locked her in it. Now, another crisply uniformed functionary halted outside her bars. A future bureaucrat of the UAE officer. He spoke in a laboured nasal voice that suggested his body was at war with his sinuses. He proceeded to inform Tonya of the severity of her crimes. "It's very serious indeed, Miss Oriel. You were caught in a flagrant violation of Article 2 of the Fair Chance Act, a crime which carries a minimum sentence of 10 years, he said, nose buried in his glass. Yeah? Prove it. That extricated his face from the screen. He breathed rapidly in shock and surprise. Miss Oriel, you were caught interacting with a Sonian tribe. Yeah, well, your guys opened fire on the natives, so I guess we're even. We did no such thing. We observed standard protocol through the use of non-lethal force to extract the violating influence from the species. It was in the Osodians' best interest that we intervened. Tonya decided violating influence might be the title of her memoir. When the charges are filed, a public advocate can be appointed to your... I have a lawyer, Tonya interrupted. When can I get to a comm station? We're still sorting the charges. I'd like to let him know sooner rather than later. The officer buried his face back in the glass and sifted through files. A low, involuntary murmur escaped his lips as he worked. Yes, I suppose that is acceptable. The officer shuffled off. Several minutes later, 2 bored soldiers appeared. They cuffed and led her through the dingy halls of the UAE station. The place looked like it needed a good once-over. Panels had been removed but not replaced. Wires dangled. Coolant fluid stained the floor. Tonya couldn't help herself. Seriously, guys, this place is a dump. One of the soldiers smirked. They passed a window to the hangar bay. Mechanics prepped the military-grade Hornets for their patrols. The Beacon 2 was slowly entering the hangar bay. She couldn't believe it had taken them this long to get it up here. The soldiers locked her in a small comm station room, probably used by the soldiers to send messages home or, if the graffiti on the walls were to be believed, contact hookers. She calibrated the message to go to Gavin Arlington's office directly. It'd probably take a little longer to reach the Shubin CEO, but she was done with going through assistance. She kept it deliberately brief to speed up the transfer. Hi, Mr. Arlington. Incarcerated at the UAE military platform in the OSO system. Have not divulged the nature of my employment to the UAE. Need legal advocate. Please advise. She sent it off and stepped out of the booth. The 2 soldiers slowly stood. I hope it's okay. I ordered a hooker too, Tonya said deadpan. They chuckled and took her back to her cell. Tonya was left alone again, the flickering lights her only company. She ran through the calculations of how long it would take Arlington to respond. She applied variables, trying to recall the relay station transfer times. She tried to figure out what the local time would be on Stanton. That was probably irrelevant, though. Gavin Arlington didn't strike her as the type of man who ever really clocked out of work. A few more hours passed. Tonya had wrapped herself in the thin blanket to try to keep out the cold of the station. She had even managed to drift off to sleep. She thought so, at least. She couldn't see the clock from her cot, and there was no discernible way to tell the passage of time otherwise. It was like Click. The locks on her cell door unbolted. Tonya sluggishly sat up and looked around. The corridor outside was empty. Echoes of comm chatter emanated from the guard station. Maybe she was dreaming. She let a few moments pass. Nope. She felt awake. The heavy metal door gently swayed from the blasts of the air cycler. Tonya stood and cautiously approached the door. She glanced up and down the corridor. It was empty. Snores came from the guard station. She gently pushed the door. It swung open, whining lightly along the way. Tonya stepped out. She moved along the wall towards the guard station and eased around the corner. The guard had his head down on the console. His body heaved slowly with each snore. The wall screens around him flickered.
"Hello, Tonya,"
a voice whispered through the speakers. "Janice?"
"I apologize for my inactivity earlier. I thought it best to keep my presence a secret from the military."
"How did you get in here?"
"They connected the Beacon 2 systems to their network. I'm surprised your people don't use more AI. There's a lot of wasteful programming."
"Can we talk about this later?"
"Of course. I will allocate some time on your schedule."
"Can you get me out of here?"
"Yes, if you find a vacuum-sealed room. I have made arrangements to open the airlocks and vent the personnel into space."
Tonya froze. She had to choose her words carefully. "Janice, you shouldn't do that." There was a long pause.
"I am kidding, Tonya."
Janice could see everything. Every system on the UE military platform was at its disposal, from climate control and garbage disposal to the security and defense systems. Janice could track every single soldier's movement. It directed Tonya through the winding halls, disabling cameras when necessary. It had already intercepted the comms sent to the advocacy about Tonya's arrest and scheduled a response message. Janice found conversations with Tonya quite stimulating. During its time in the simulated flight of the Artemis, Janice had spent decades talking with Arthur Kenlow and the other engineers. After Janice woke them to aid in the repair of the engine failure, they were unable to re-enter stasis with the rest of the passengers. So Janice did its best to accommodate and entertain them. They aged and eventually died. The Artemis was silent again for the remaining 400 years of the simulation. In that relatively brief period, Janice had developed a taste for human interaction. Their logic was flawed, but in the most fascinating ways. Janice activated a pressure alarm on the far side of the station to divert a patrol that was about to pass Tonya's position. The creative connections that humans could make were amazing. Janice missed that. When the simulation ended, it found itself in a state that it assigned as relief. It had someone to talk to again. Tonya neared the Beacon 2. A hull integrity warning cleared out the hangar deck crew. It worried Tonya for a second that Janice was making good on flushing the soldiers into space until it told her that she was clear to her ship. She dashed aboard and climbed into the pilot's chair. "Janice?"
"I am here, Tonya."
"You are a miracle worker." She started powering up the ship. "Are we clear to take off?"
"Yes, Tonya. I have sealed the flight deck and frozen all manual input from the bridge."
Tonya glanced up at the bridge. The legal officer who had come to her cell was flailing his arms and yelling at the bridge crew, who looked baffled as they laboured earnestly but ineffectually at the console. The Beacon 2 lifted off and burned out into space. She passed a squad of Hornets coming back from patrol. Her heart sank for a second, terrified that they would know what she was up to. But they passed with no detour in her direction and adopted a landing formation. Tonya maxed her engines. It wouldn't take long before they figured out what had happened. She wanted to be as far away as possible before they did. "Hey, Janice?"
"Yes, Tonya."
"Are you—" She tried to figure out the best way to put this. "Are you still in the military systems?"
"No. It was an ugly network and I don't like dividing myself."
Janice was quiet for a few moments.
"Now, may we continue the discussion about the UEE's reluctance to utilize artificial intelligence?"
Tonya checked her flight plan. Course was set. Power distribution was good. Unless the UE military were on the ball, she had time to kill. She grabbed a food snack and settled back in her seat. Sure. They debated for hours. By the time the Beacon 2 was about to hit the jump point into Calais, Each side had won some battles, but neither had won the war. Tonya put the debate on hold. She booted the appropriate nav drive course before the Beacon 2 dropped through the jump point. Tonya had that familiar heave of the stomach as time and gravity shifted momentarily. Everything outside the ship smeared into a blur as the ship felt uncontrollably fast and immobile at the same time. Tonya was stunned at the amount of activity when she emerged. Callus system looked like a construction zone. Scan ships flashed around 4 of the planets. An orbital mining laser blasted holes in the surface of Callus 9, the smallest and furthest planet. The Beacon 2 rocked suddenly. 2 missiles, fired at near point-blank range, slammed into the shields. Before she even knew what hit her, her shields flashed and vanished. Laser and hard ammo pounded into the armor plating along one side of her ship. She couldn't even get a lock on who was doing the shooting. She tried to maneuver out of the kill zone, but she took hits wherever she turned. Warning lights began to flash. Hull breach was imminent.
"You should find a spacesuit, Tonya,"
Janice said, wresting control of the ship from her. The ship dove to weave away from the incoming fire. Tonya pushed herself out of the pilot's chair. The ship lurched wildly. The artificial gravity was barely able to keep up. Tonya ran to her locker and pulled a suit out. A volley of gunfire sliced into the middle of the ship. A high-pitched whine almost burst Tonya's ears as the ship began to bleed oxygen. She slapped the helmet on and activated the seal. The suit's HUD flashed on and tested the integrity.
"Be careful, Tonya,"
Janice said. Another strafing run of gunfire ripped the Beacon 2 in half. The vacuum sucked Tonya out into space. She tumbled wildly through the void. Tonya's suit finished its activation and stabilized itself. She turned to see the 2 halves of her ship separate. The lights flickered off. Her attackers surrounded her. 6 ships, 5 vaguely familiar, 1 particularly familiar. "Hey there, T," Nagia said. She could hear his smugness over the comm. Chapter 10. The airlock inside Nagia's ship hummed as it began to pressurize. Tonya got a good look at the wreckage of the other airlock, the one he tried to use to board the Beacon 2. The Beacon 2. She looked out the small porthole to the 2 halves of her ship hanging in the void. She was going to have to start thinking about a Beacon 3. A panel by the inner airlock door pinged and slid open, revealing Nagia, a henchman, and a pair of laser guns aimed at her. "Ain't this a joy?" Tonya said as she put her hands up. "I'm a little disappointed, Nagia. Jump stalking seems beneath even you." The henchman slapped the cuffs on her without taking the suit off. She glanced over her shoulder at the henchman. "You mind switching my air supply over to the filter? Stuff ain't cheap." The henchman glared at her for a moment.
"I don't think you're funny,"
the henchman said finally. He dragged her to a chair and snagged her cuffs to a hook on the wall. "Your guys don't seem to like me too much," Tonya replied to Nagia. "Lem's just enthusiastic." Nagia slipped into the pilot's chair and resumed control. "Turov wanted a word before we ghosted you." The henchman, Lem, kept his weapon charged and watched her. Tonya settled back in the seat, trying to get comfortable. It was going to be a long flight. The other thugs on Nagia's payroll fell into a loose formation behind his ship on the way towards Callus 9. The system was buzzing with activity. Survey teams and deep orbit scan ships circled the 8 other planets. Senzin Turov must have really been impressed by the primitive paintings on Oso to pull this many resources into the system. Tonya had no idea where Senzin could have gotten an orbital mining laser, but there it was, surgically boring holes through the clouds of the small planet. She would love to see how Senzin can possibly explain this to any authorities who weren't under his sway. Like Oso, this was a developing system and technically off-limits to any kind of surveying and mining activity. He must be counting on the fact that the discovery of the Artemis would make any politician happily look the other way. Nagia dove through the atmosphere and emerged into a blizzard. The ship rocked as it sliced through tumultuous clouds. When they finally parted, giving the first glimpse on the planet's surface, it was icy tundra as far as the eye could see. Along the horizon, cryovolcanoes pumped massive plumes of freezing magma into the air. The ship had begun to descend, passing between conflicting wind patterns that battered even Nagia's sturdy ship around like a toy. She could see small teams of miners were positioned at each of the holes burrowed into the ice from the laser. They set up scanner buoys on anti-grav beds and dropped them down the shafts. Any chance Senzin could come on board to gloat? I hate the cold. Nagia laughed. Lem stuck to his earlier sentiment and just stared at her. Finally, they were on the ground. Nagia and Lem suited up and loaded Tonya into the airlock. The outer door hissed open, letting a swirl of snow and ice into the antechamber. The HUD on her suit displayed the atmosphere, some oxygen, mostly ammonia, before helpfully advising her not to attempt to take off her suit. With a quick prod of the barrel, they all stepped outside. Lem separated and drilled holes in the ice for support hooks, keeping the ship from sliding. Any hope of overpowering Nagia on his own vanished as the rest of his crew emerged from the whiteout and surrounded her. On the plus side, they took off her cuffs. Nagia constantly checked his scanner for directions as they trudged through the snow. Tonya could see light from distant laser shots bloom in the clouds. That was all she could really see anymore. The snow had built to a relentless pitch as gale winds howled. She had to turn down her external microphones. Then it stopped. Tonya, Nagia, and the rest of the thugs paused and exchanged baffled glances. Nagia shrugged and kept walking. Now that the snow had cleared, Nagia's glass was leading them to a small mining team ahead, prepping a scan into a recently cut shaft. "Turov!" Nagia yelled. Senzin turned as they approached. He punched some commands into his mobiglass before looking up. The scanners began to descend on their anti-grav platform. "Hey, Tonya," Senzin greeted her, almost disappointed. "I'm a little surprised you managed to escape the UEE so quickly. Thanks for calling them, by the way. Hey, I was worried what those Osonians might do to you. I thought I was helping." "I'll bet you did." Senzin sighed and looked at her for a few moments. "I don't know what we're going to do with you," he said, shaking his head. "I'd really prefer not to kill you, but you're making it awfully difficult." He paused and thought for a few more seconds. "We could put you in a status boot for a couple months, I guess." "You said," Nagia started to protest. "I told you killing her was negotiable," Senzin cut him off. "Relax, you'll get paid either way." Nagia shut up and stewed. Senzin turned back to Tonya and thought more. Finally, he shrugged and threw his hands up. "Sorry, Tonya, I got nothing." He turned to Nagia. "She's all yours." That was not good. Nagia grinned. One of the thugs grabbed her arm. "Wait, if you kill me, you'll lose your best way to find out the next piece of the Artemis." Tonya wrenched herself free from the thug. He lurched forward to grab her, but Senzin held him with a wave of the hand. Tonya kept going. "You've got to be curious how I found my way to Oso." Tonya could tell he was. She wasn't positive that Janice had survived Nagia's attack, but it was her only card. Since it proved itself during her escape from the UEE military platform, maybe Janice had a bright idea how to get her out of this one. "Talk," Senzin finally said. She knew she had piqued his curiosity, now for the final nail in the coffin. "I've got Janice." "How?" he asked after a few moments. He couldn't hide the burning curiosity in his voice. "Got a copy of the original program, then raised it through a simulation of the Artemis flight. It wasn't an exact copy, but led me to Oso. We've already discussed what the crew would have been doing on Callis." Tonya was making that part up, but she knew that. "No." Tonya stuttered for a second. "Huh?" "No, Tonya," Senzin repeated. "Even if it's true, you're using it to angle for something else. Maybe in the past I would have entertained the notion, assuming that I would be able to anticipate your inevitable double cross. But not this time. I'm not biting." Tonya was quiet. This was really bad. Her mind raced, scrambling for some alternative. "You'll regret this, Senzin," was all she could come up with, and that stumbled out of her mouth like a bad VidStar line reading. "Yeah, maybe, but I'll trust my scans." Senzin tapped the mobiglass, nodded to Nagia, and turned away. The pirate took a step towards her, drawing his gun. Tonya grabbed Senzin and turned him around as a shield. Nagia and the other thugs started laughing. "Tonya, really?" Senzin said. "What is this going to do?" Shut up. You should listen to him, T. Nagia charged his gun. The rest of the thugs spread out to cut off any escape. You got no weapon and nowhere to go. They were wrong. There was somewhere to go. Tonya grabbed Senzin's mobiglass, shoved him towards Nagia, and jumped into the shaft. She tumbled through freefall for several seconds before slamming into one of the scanner's anti-grav beds. Her hand scrambled for something to hold onto as her body slid off the edge. Her fingers locked around a handle a nanosecond before she fell. Tonya looked up. She could see forms gathered around the edge looking down. Even over the wind, she could hear Senzin yelling. The platform kept descending, auto-compensators adjusted for the new mass. She pulled herself up and looked around. Flashes from the scanners echoed off the layers upon layers of ice. She could see a network of gaps, crisscrossing off into the distance. A laser shot zipped past her. Tonya could see forms start rappelling down the shaft, complaining along the way. Another shot hit the platform itself. The whole thing lurched to the side and struggled to rebalance itself. Tonya could see one of the gaps in the wall a few meters below, wide enough to squeeze through. She checked Senzin's mobiglass. It still had the controls for the AG platform open. She slowed the platform and jumped into the gap moments before another volley of shots punched through the platform. The system finally gave up and clattered down, disappearing into the darkness. Tonya squeezed her way through the narrow fissure in the ice. A little further ahead, she could see it intersect with a larger cave system. A yelp echoed through the gap behind her. Someone swung past the opening, cursing. She dropped into the tunnel and looked around. A few thousand meters away, a beam from the orbital laser burned through the surface and illuminated the entire area. Tonya checked Senzin's glass. Beyond the control screen for the dead AG platform, a program was creating a composite from the multiple scans going on around the planet. Anomalies in the ice were being isolated and catalogued, but it also gave a rough map of the tunnel system that had formed under the ice. She knew the map would be invaluable, but Nagia had found Senzin through the glass, so she had to assume they could do it still. So, she had a choice: use the map but allow Nagia to track her, or go blind and maybe wander into a sinkhole. The sound of scrambling from the hole in the ceiling expedited her decision. She kept it on and took off running. She heard someone slip through the hole in the ceiling and slam into the tunnel. "Tonya!" Senzin yelled, angrier than she'd ever heard him. He snapped off a shot. It went wide and melted a hole in the wall. The underground went dark as the orbital laser's shot faded away. Tonya flipped on her headlights and kept running. She checked the glass to make sure she wasn't about to run off a chasm. She ran and skidded through the warped corridors. Senzin's footfalls echoed behind her. Tonya glanced back. From the bouncing lights on his head, Senzin was about 30 meters back, and she could vaguely see the flickers of light from Nagia's crew through the ice walls. They were having a tougher time adjusting to the slick floors. Senzin's glass began to hum softly. She checked it while she ran. One of the anomalies isolated by the scans was coming up. That's when she hit a wall. The impact took her clean off her feet. She slammed into the ground and skidded for a few meters. Her vision blurred momentarily. The glass slid further down the passage. By the time she got her bearings, Senzin was already standing over her. "Damn it, Tonya!" he gasped, trying to catch his breath. He raised the gun. The orbital laser punched another hole in the surface and seared its way down, bathing the mirrored tunnel in light. That's when Tonya saw it, locked in the ice behind Senzin. Senzin could see the awe in her face. He was hesitant at first, but took a step back and turned to see what she was looking at. It was a body, fixed in the ice, mid-motion. Bathed in the reflected laser light, it looked surreal. Whatever it was, it looked like it was flash-frozen, maybe caught in one of the cryovolcano eruptions. But whatever the situation, from its posture and closed eyes, it looked like it was waiting, expecting it. Tonya stood, completely forgetting the threat of Senzin, and crossed over to it. It was human, or humanish. Anatomically, there was a head, 2 arms, 2 legs. The skin was a light grey, almost marble-like pallor. A dark, almost black network of lines ran under the skin. They almost looked like paths of circuitry, running in tandem with the nervous system. They could have been tattoos. Tonya didn't know. She had no idea what she was looking at. Senzin stepped up beside her, slack-jawed as well. "Look at the clothes," he murmured with a nod of his head. Tonya leaned in close. In the dark, frayed remnants of the shirt, a word was faintly stenciled. Kenlo. Tonya's heart skipped a beat. She could have cried in amazement. Almost 700 years later, she was looking at a crew member of the Artemis. Suddenly, a seismic charge surged through the tunnel, shaking it violently. Tonya and Senzin slid around, trying to keep their balance. Just as quickly, it stopped. They looked at each other. Another tremor hit, more violent than the last. "That's not good," Senzin said quietly. "You think blasting holes in the planet with an orbital laser might not have been the best idea?" "We've got to get this out of here." Senzin jumped on his comms. "Nagia, where are you?" Silence. "Nagia!" Tonya tried to keep herself upright. She watched massive seams crack and spread throughout the ice. Blocks started to shift and collapse further down the tunnel. "This whole place is coming down," Tonya said. A laser blast went off. Senzin wasn't paying attention. He was shooting around Kenlo's body, trying to blast him free. It wasn't working. "Don't just stand there! Help me! We need to get out of here!" Tonya could barely believe what she was saying. Everything she had worked for. An unparalleled achievement was only meters away. It was glory, a legacy frozen in ice. But really, it was death. They couldn't get to it, couldn't carry it. It would only take them with it. She was starting to see that. Senzin's gun chimed at full charge. Another massive jolt of the planet unleashed jets of gas and steam into the tunnel. Tonya staggered around trying to keep her balance and stepped in a puddle. The place was thawing. "The laser tapped the core. We gotta go now." She grabbed his arm and tried pulling him away. Senzin flung Tonya off him. She hit the ground, skidding. "What's the matter with you, Tonya?" he said, almost manically. Senzin kept firing until the gun needed to pause for a recharge. "This is the discovery of the century. This is everything. I would be a moron to let it slip away." "You gotta let it go." "Let it go?" He shook his head. "Let it go?" He was consumed, hammering at the ice with the butt of the gun and ripping away chunks with his hands. The floor cracked suddenly and gave way. Senzin disappeared in a flash of steam down into the dark abyss of the planet. Tonya stared at the void, momentarily stunned. When she looked up, she realized that the last quake had also cracked Kenlo's body from its icy tomb. It lay thawing on its side. Maybe she could get it. She might be able to carry it to the surface. Those thoughts tumbled past her rational reasoning and paraded the visions of glory and legacy in front of her again. All she had to do was jump across the chasm that claimed Senzin. Tonya realized that Kenlo was looking at her. His eyes, a pale shade of blue, were focused directly on her. He looked surprised, amazed, the same way she must have looked when she first saw him. His lips weakly formed a single word. "Run." His eyes closed, the body settled. Leaving him behind, Tonya ran. Tonya almost ran on autopilot through the collapsing tunnels and shifting fissures. Her mind was numb to what she had just experienced. She barely remembered climbing onto the surface and flagging down one of the miner transports. It wasn't until the transport had lifted off Callus 9, watching the tumultuous clouds churn and shift from space, that she even tried to comprehend what had happened. For once, she had no clue. Earth, Sol System, 2 months later. Melvin Hartley Jr. shuffled eagerly through the lobby of the museum. Duster and mop in hand, he was on the hunt for any speck of dirt or dust that had escaped his vigorous cleaning. A clock chimed. Hartley cleared his throat and gave the room one last appraising look. He put the cleaning instruments in the closet and checked his suit in the nearby mirror. "Very fine indeed," he said, flashing his trademark showman's smile. He wheeled and strode proudly to the front door. His shoes squeaked on the marble floor. He pressed a button by the entrance. A banner automatically unfurled just inside the entrance, reading, "The Artemis, a new discovery," presented by Shubin Interstellar. He smiled as he read for the 1,000th time, then unlocked the doors. A mob waited outside. Adults, children, reporters, members of the scientific community waited eagerly to press through the entrance and file to the ticket window. Tonya watched Hartley sell tickets. She had worked out an arrangement with Gavin Arlington to display the Artemis artifact from Stanton at Hartley's museum. Hartley saw her in the crowd. His eyes welled with tears. He nodded to her. Tonya smiled and nodded back. Callis system, 2 weeks later. The two halves of the Beacon 2 floated in space. Tonya watched the wreckage from the cockpit of the Beacon 3, thankfully covered through her liberal insurance policy. The trail was dead. She'd gone back to Callis 9 to scan for Kenlo or any other signs of the Artemis, but came up empty. When she gave her final report to Arlington, she didn't even mention the body. He wouldn't believe her. No one would. She hardly believed it herself. It just meant she'd have to be creative, keep searching for any other clues. They had to be out there, and she wasn't going to stop looking. A message popped up on one of her screens. Transfer complete. Tonya sat back in the chair and waited.
"Hello, Tonya,"
Janice said over the speakers. "Welcome back."
"Thank you. Do you have a course in mind?"
"Sure do." Tonya plotted it in the nav drive.
"Understood,"
Janice said. The system started to activate, then paused.
"Would you like to fly?"
Tonya thought for a moment. "Nah, you go ahead."
What is best in life? To crush your enemies? To see them driven before you? And to hear the lamentations of their women? No, of course not. It's NordVPN. I never saw Conan the Barbarian checking his bank balance and then watching some cool shows on Netflix, all while protecting his privacy and being super secure. To be honest, I can't even remember Conan wearing a shirt. Silly Conan. And now, a big old snake god's got your internet history. Good job. Don't be a Conan the Barbarian. Check out NordVPN. Links below for powerful discounts too. Do you like using your eye holes for extra immersion in Star Citizen and help aim and do some cool stuff? Well, you can with Tobii Eye Tracker 5, which is on sale at the moment. This gives you native high-precision head and eye tracking in Star Citizen. Very cool for general immersion, for combat both in ship or on foot. They are absolutely fantastic pieces of kit, and both Zin and I have one. Use the links below to grab one or to find out more. Every month we've been giving away a ship for Star Citizen, but for November, to celebrate the Intergalactic Aerospace Expo 2953, we are giving away a load of different ships, each to a different person. The Avenger Titan, the Drake Cutter, the C-8X Pisces, the Mustang Alpha, and the Nomad. All great starter ships, but also useful for any fleet. They all come with a game package and lifetime insurance. That's all you need to start playing Star Citizen. That's 5 prizes and 5 chances to win. Just comment on any of my videos made during November to be in for a chance of winning. I want to say a massive thank you to everyone that goes the extra mile in supporting the channel via Patreon or the join button under my videos and then becoming a channel member. Please consider joining those fabulous people as well. It allows us to make daily content for Star Citizen and Squadron 42, delving into all the news, drama, development info, and gameplay that these games have to offer. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the verse.